suffering is not bad. Suffering by choice, well, if you're aware of it, that's just stupid.
We are living in historic times right now with what is happening in the world. And I don't want to get too political on this, but the fact of the matter that what's going on in Ukraine it's impacting the world. And Kris, you said something to me last week that I think resonates a little bit with what's going on. You were talking about suffering and how your real mission in life, the reason you're teaching people how to get wealthy, the reason you're teaching people how to change their mindset is because you have strong feelings about human suffering. Is that accurate?
Well, I would say that some suffering is optional and some is not. And so there are things in life you can control and there are things that you can't. And I find that most humans can't tell the difference between the two. There was a time when I most certainly couldn't. And so in my experience, when we have a traumatic experience that's outside of our hands, the longer we spend thinking about it, woeing over it, feeling sad over it, all that can do is erode the power of who we are in this present moment, which means that we're then going to proactively build a future that we don't want. That suffering, we have to find a way to accelerate bringing to an end. Then there's the other kind of suffering. These are the people in our life that we love that are making choices that pain our soul. And there's something beautiful about who we become when we have to endure those kind of trials. So yeah, we're living in a world where imperialism, is this really happening? Do we still have people that are pulling off a take over the world and move boundaries and impose themselves like that? Because those people in Ukraine, they're trying to live a free life. They're trying to live under democracy. And right now they have something semi-capitalistic and communistic and fascist coming in their world saying no. And so how would I feel if I were in that situation? What can you control? What can't you control? And what do you learn from beautiful suffering? That's up to the eye of the beholder and us wanting to make the most out of life.
So a couple of things on that, Kris. And Rob, we're joined today by Rob Gill, special guest.
The one and only Rob from Bayonne, who is my business partner. We do social media together. We also do, Rob has this amazing financial company, does insurance and a number of other things.
Check him out on Insta.
Which is,
TikTok.
by the way, incredibly suffering driven.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. I've heard you share a few things, Rob, about the suffering that you've seen. I know you've been through, you've had a few hits in this life.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up in a middle-class town in New Jersey, Bayonne, 75,000 people, 3 miles, youngest of 4. And early on in my life, my parents did the best they can. And you think about the lack of financial education that was just all over the place at that particular time in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But I grew up with an older sibling that was HIV positive at a time when that was like, it just came out because of, heroin drug abuse. She later got sober. But being around the secrets and some of the suffering that Kris talked about, optional versus non-optional, but being able to have a life of self-imprisonment and then a life of freedom requires certain action steps either way, none of which the folks in Ukraine really, they are there defending freedom in a way that I think we've only seen in the movies growing up, and this is happening real time right now. Non-judgment when you look at Afghanistan, but I think those people kind of fled pretty quick in the similar circumstance than what you're seeing with Ukraine right now. So for me, I stand for how to break through suffering emotionally and financially, and they're connected, no doubt about it. And what are the action steps to be able to do it? But, watching on TV what's happening with Ukraine and seeing the inspiration every day. I don't know when this video is coming out, but we're in day 5 of the attempted takeover, and it's not making. I don't know the politics behind it, but I think from a perspective of just the visual, it doesn't make Russia look good right now.
No, and beyond that, the reality is everyone is going through something that happens at a global level. We all went through a 2-year pandemic where we all came together by being apart. And then at a very personal level, everyone's going through something, right? I mean, everyone is going through something, but often we don't really know. And I think what's great about the conversation that we're having today, I'm hoping that some of the people listening have an opportunity to start self-evaluating. Where do I suffer repeatedly from the same point of my past over and over and over again? And why is that occurring? Is there a reason why your past becomes present over and over again? And for most people, when they experience something really bad, it leaves an aftertaste in their mouth that is it's one of two cycles. It's the sad cycle or the anger cycle. And either way, depression comes out of it. Because if you do enough anger, you're going to think horrible enough about other people that you're going to reflect poorly on your own self-worth. Yeah. If you do sad good enough, you're going to become depressed. And if you depress good enough, you might even exit at one point Earth. Yep. And so it's a cycle that so many of us live inside of. And that's because emotional intelligence is not really available. It's not trained. It's not something that we're taught to herald as something important for living a successful life. So what do? We suffer over and over and over again. And I mean, Carson, you're CEO, you see this, right? I mean, you hired 100 people last year and you get close to some people. And are you not sometimes baffled by some of the people that claim that they want a better life, but then they don't do the action steps to make it happen?
Yeah, I call it shooting themselves in the foot.
Okay, it's like break that down.
It's interesting to me to see how often people's strategy isn't in alignment with what they actually want. It's like, I want this, but I'm going to do these things that clearly don't lead that direction. And I think it's hard for us to see when we're in our own cloud of pain and suffering. And that's why I turn to you two. And I think, especially you, Kris, because I've seen the comments on your YouTube channel people respond to all of our social media. And you have a very blessed life right now. And Rob, I'm less familiar with yours, but I believe that financially you are living quite the blessed life right now.
His belly would say that he is living a very blessed life. That's because Rob's losing 50 pounds in the next 40 pounds in the next 4 months for us. He's got some horrible consequences. True or false?
True. Yeah. Truth. I'm still going to do both, but lose the weight.
So it's so easy for someone to look at you guys and just be like, oh man, they're so successful and I'll never be able to be that.
No. So I want to break it down. Rob, I'd love for you to share your story. For me, I come from a really beautiful family with 8 other siblings, 9. And I remember having a really wonderful childhood until something really, really horrible that created this black cloud that decades later has not been lifted. And, a story came about in the family from some abuse that, frankly, people haven't gotten over. And I remember feeling really disconnected from certain members of my family. And still even today, that's still somewhat a story. There's some truth there. And I look at it, and for me, I feel sadness just reflecting on it right now. But I remember when I didn't know how to cope with that 15 years ago, and I just started thinking, man, there's got to be a higher form of emotional intelligence to know how to deal with this, because I wasn't dealing well at that time. I was going through some of my own business pains and struggles, and it all started swirling into just a lot of personal pain for me. And I look back on it, and there's something beautiful in it because it helped birth, 2.0 Krohn and 4.0 Krohn and 7.0 Krohn. And that happened when I discovered that I was actually in control of my feelings. Yeah. And I didn't know that. I didn't understand that I was manufacturing emotions by choice, because some of these choices were unconscious to me. They were just happening. Most people are experiencing emotions based on patterns. And so literally we're like robots. The circumstances are changing. The people that we meet today might be novel, but all we're doing is reincarnating past choices over like a system, like a program that's been downloaded. And so we already have a preconceived notion of how we respond to certain things. Like if you're set in your ways and you like your breakfast a certain way, and then you're traveling on the weekend and that breakfast isn't available, you might find yourself saying, wow, breakfast sucks. Because you're habituated to wanting your breakfast to look a certain way. Well, we do this with people. Many of us, we go through life and we collect sadness, anger, and depression from bad experiences. And if you don't learn how to clean that, if you will, off of your soul, they just stay stuck to you. And that's what was happening to me. I had problems with my family. I had problems with my business. I had a woman steal money from me. It led to literally a 14-month investigation with the SEC that I spent $1 million defending myself. And at that time, all of these things were coming crashing down. I had a mentor in my life that I felt like turned their back on me. And I didn't know how to clean this off. And so I was collecting it. And that meant that I was becoming a more bitter person. So yeah, you're right. People today are like, wow, Kris, you have everything going your way. You just take your family and whisk them away on a private jet and go create really cool memories. I'm like, yeah. Do you know what I went through to become this man? And if I hadn't made some choices back then, I wouldn't be the man I am today. And some of those choices were, number one, realizing, wait a second, life isn't happening to me, it's for me. And that means that I have a choice with how I react. So the moment for me that changed everything, I was reading this book, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And here's a guy who had his family taken away, his business, everything, his clothing, right? He's in the lineup. He's being drug off to concentration camp. And he got to live in this concentration camp for 2 years. And for him as a psychologist, it was a little bit of a social experiment because he was observing, he was trained to analyze the behavior of people around him. And he started realizing that there was a connection between how people reacted to things and then how long they would live. And I remember this moment in the book. It was like he, as this departed soul, like his blood cried forth from the ground through the pages of the book and screamed at me when I read this passage that said, they can take everything from you. Except your ability to choose how you react to any given situation. And I realized, wait, so all freedom can be stripped. You can take my clothes, you can take my family, you can shoot them, you can kill them, you can take everything. But you can't take the way that I react away. That's on me. And he found in this book that a positive reaction will breed positive results and a negative reaction will breed more negative results. And it's either a downward spiral or it's an upward spiral.
Yep.
That changed, that moment changed my life.
And right on the tails of that, Kris, there's upwards of 500,000 people that have fled Ukraine now.
Yep.
Okay. But there's a lot of people that have fled to Ukraine, citizens, civilians that have said, no, give us a gun, we'll stand and fight.
Yeah.
The U.S. offered to send in a helicopter and rescue Vladimir Zelensky because he's like number one kill target if Russia takes Kiev. And he said, no, I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
The reaction to the circumstance is so different that he's being heralded as a hero, right, in social media as this is playing out. How does one get to a point where you can react to opposition and hardship and trial that way, where you run towards the flames instead of away from it?
So
how do you do it,
so
Kris?
I used a phrase here, and then I want to get Rob's perspective because, Rob, you've overcome some huge personal challenge in your life.
Yep.
I refer to suffering as beautiful suffering. And I share it that way because I'm hoping that it disrupts, I think, people's concept of suffering a little bit to realize that, wait a second, what if there is a loving God who puts us on a planet where there is no fascism and communism, where people are controlling your personal thoughts and ideas? Like, you have true agency, the right to choose whatever you want, however you want to feel, because my belief is all of us, regardless of your dictatorship or regime or freedom or democracy or whatever, you are at choice in your life with what you do. It's an agency that we all possess.
I mean, you have to bear the brunt of the consequences of your choices, but at the end of the day, you do have a choice.
And they are your choices. So we become the byproduct of the choices that we make in life. And so when I say beautiful suffering, what if there were some things in life that you could only learn through suffering? Because I think that many people's messes become their messages. And the things in life that hurt the most, if it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. I think that a lot of us find ourselves through suffering. I think that sometimes our becoming, our origin story requires hardship. You show me any fantastic movie, an epic movie that everyone loves, and show me a character that doesn't have to go through hell first. It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. It's because we are made through suffering. What makes it beautiful? In the moment, it's like this. If I were to take my hands and clap them together really hard, like, right now I feel a stinging sensation. My hands hurt, but already now it's beginning to dissipate. This is pain. And we will experience pain through life. You can't avoid it. It's like when you stub your toe and you're like, why? Don't ask. It's just part of life. You're going to experience pain. But the moment I take this and I interpret it in a way that is not good for me, that's when the suffering truly begins. And it's an emotional response to something that occurs that I can't let go of, and I get stuck. Real suffering is just being stuck. Or it's desiring something. Because in Buddhism, one of the core tenets is that all suffering begins with desire. So bottom line is we get stuck on a notion, and if we can't evolve through it, then suffering ensues. But eventually, and I think this is, and I want everyone listening to see if they can identify with this. Look at the most horrible thing that's ever happened to you that you've overcome and made you stronger, and reflect on that, and let's use that as an example. Something happened likely a long time ago, and it was the sting. Ouch. I get angry, I get sad, I experience all this negative emotion. Then I develop a story of suffering, and I feel like the pains of a damned soul because I'm reliving it over and over again mentally. My brain is powerful enough to relive something painful and then take the suffering and practice getting good at it and actually exaggerating it and allowing the feeling to be brought into the presence for decades, even over and over and over again, until we have an awakening moment where we realize maybe this suffering doesn't have to define me, and maybe there's something to learn. The moment we stop being stuck is when we ask, what am I learning? This is the key point of transition. Because if you can extract a lesson that is useful for you, it will start turning the suffering and turning it into a beautiful lesson. And if you learn the lesson, you get unstuck and you start moving forward again. And then if you learn to move forward in a way where the suffering is now a weapon, something that is good, something that you can leverage for wisdom or for greater results' sake, then you actually move from not just accepting what you once denied, you embrace it and say, I'm grateful that I had this horrible experience, and what you once thought was so horrible now has become beautiful. Well, that whole process of, ouch, it can take people years or decades, or sometimes they never get to gratitude, they never get to beauty. In my life, when I really started taking control of my life and true responsibility is when I could go from ouch to thank you. What's the lesson? Thank you. And the sooner you can get there, the sooner you become equipped with a new weapon of power that you get to leverage for enhanced results and understanding in your life. Suffering is not bad. Suffering by choice, well, if you're aware of it, that's just stupid. Rob, tell me about your suffering and how you ended it.
Yeah, thank you, Kris. Wow. Unbelievable nuggets. Hope you guys take that and rewind it back and just listen again, because there was some really good magic there. But here's what I heard Kris talk about, and I'll break that down, what I heard, and tie it into my story, where, you know, Kris spoke about Viktor Frankl, phenomenal book. Thanks for sharing that. And one of the part of that studies was he recognized that 1 out of 25 people survived. And that's where he tied
That's
into
not great odds.
Yeah, that's how he tied into the visualization while he was naked, getting, you know.
Now, real quick, Carson, you just said not great odds. The people with the right mindset had great odds. The people with the crappy mindset had horrible odds.
Yeah.
Just for the record, that's what he said. He said those that
24 out of 25 had.
There was a moment where he said it was this coming Christmas and everyone had made a decision. The war will be done by Christmas. It was stupid. It made no sense.
Yep.
But everyone rallied around this idea. And those
hope.
that did,
Yep.
come Christmas morning, the war hadn't ended.
Died.
And they were dead.
Yep.
In
Same
other
thing
words,
happened in Vietnam POW camps.
Yeah.
Same thing.
So by the way, the desire to live is tied to hope, and hope comes from sometimes something arbitrary that you decide. Make sure that you place your hope in good things.
That's right. And this is what I wanted to share, Kris, because you talked about, which is phenomenal, how do you break that dark shadow that you experienced, right?
Yeah.
For me, Rob Gill, I'm sober in AA one day at a time since July of 1996. I was in self-imprisoned, environmental, the way I grew up, between, you know, alcohol and certain other things I was doing at that point in my life, and it led me down a path where every decision I made was not a good decision. You know, for the most part, it was based on fear, it was based on scarcity, and you know, I just felt like I didn't belong, right? So I had the good fortune of getting through that suffering of getting sober, and it's been a one day at a time journey since then. And along the way, in AA, there's a 12-step process that removes the debris between you and your higher power. What happened with me as time went on, I began to have some good success in business. And to Kris's point about the airplane, an overnight success is a 20-year in the making process, right? I had some good success, but then all of a sudden, there was something in my business that hit unexpectedly and came from a direction you would never expect it, and it changed everything for me. So Kris said before about, you know, how do you get rid of the dark shadow, and what are the steps to learn along the way on how to take something that could seemingly be a suffering or a disadvantage and turn into an advantage. And along the way, what I learned, not on my own, because it's about who you surround yourself with, right? I learned to ask myself a different question when this stuff began to perk up. Not when that fear would kick in and you could feel it in every part of your body, and it's like, oh my God, this isn't going to happen, or oh my, you know, the fear just kind of controls you. I'm sure when you spent that $1 million with the attorney, I could relate to that, right? There's a fear there. And the quicker you could get through those situations by asking yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I improve on a daily basis? Instead of saying, why is this happening to me, the big toe? That's been the greatest leaping lesson for me. And by the way, because those questions I began to ask, that's how I actually met you. You know, we met each other through Sean, all through the journey in Tony Robbins. And it was really about understanding the questions and how to being able to really take that information. And because when something like just hits you and it's raw and something quote unquote bad happens to you, that gets tied into your nervous system. And if something feels similar to that 5 or 10 years later, you're going to go back to that incident. No different than in my family. I was the youngest of 4. My sister was addicted to drugs. The whole family suffers when one of the children is suffering. It's a family disease. And all of a sudden she was in rehab, and I'll never forget it. It was the day Ronald Reagan got shot. See, I know this because everything was good in our house for 2 weeks. She was in rehab. Guess what? He gets shot the same day she gets thrown out of rehab, and my family was in turmoil again. I still have this feeling to this day. I was 10 years old. I can still tell you all about what it felt like, the whole emotional tie into that, which eventually led me down my path before I was able to have the good fortune of suffering into sobriety, right? GOD, gift of desperation, that's what suffering is, not the suffering you choose, but the suffering that seems to be something you couldn't have controlled. So it's about surrounding yourself with winners, surrounding yourself with proven winners with integrity that have been there and done that. I think that's what I've been able to do because I can't take credit for anything other than I listen to my good teachers and mentors.
Well, I'm telling you right now, Rob, it's a beautiful story. I'm experiencing the same thing now with my daughter because I, years ago, then developed a whole technique for how you overcome suffering. It's called Breakthrough. I wrote a book about it. It's called Limitless. People literally all over the world come to my events and you've experienced this. Like, come up on stage. You've done one of these.
I cried.
They're really powerful,
Yes.
life-changing experiences. And I thought, wow, maybe I can be that dad whose kids can skip this process because I can just show them right out the gate. And you know what I realize? No human being, no matter, by the way, no matter if you're listening to this, no matter how amazing and incredible and hurtful your story is, no matter how deep the abuse, no matter how deep the hurt, no matter how horrific the story, whether your story is worse than others, no one escapes childhood without something like that, because we are all going through something. But you have to have a way to clean the soul. You have to have a way to release. And I developed a technique for it. For people in Hawaii, they call it ho'oponopono. For other people, it might be God and religion and spending time with your priest or and your rabbi. And so you have to have a way to clean this stuff off, because here's when your life will change. When you realize that instead of why me, wrong question, like you said, it's when you start realizing and ask this question: what can I actually control? My daughter's going through this right now. And 2 weeks ago, everything came to a critical head because for 2 years, she's told herself this story that I don't know why this is happening. I don't know why this, which is the same thing as saying that I have no control. And there's nothing I can do about it. And we had this moment and I just basically poured deeply into her and just said, tomorrow morning at breakfast, try on this one thing to see if you actually might have an ounce of control more than you thought. And that's now a week later, and she is learning that she has all sorts of control. So your old life can't end and your awakening can't begin until you recognize that victimhood is a choice and it's a state of mind, just like suffering. Crap's going to happen to you. Can't control that. How you respond to it, that's on you. So you can allow your past to become your future by continuing to suffer, or you can decide right now in this moment, I'm done because I'm going to ask this question. What am I learning? Why should I be grateful for this? How is this the best thing that's ever happened to me? Interrupt your life by asking those questions. And all of a sudden you'll start thinking thoughts you haven't before. And you'll start shifting from the ouch of the pain of the past into, wait a second, smell something. Smells beautiful. Like roses. Like, how could thorns be connected to the beautiful fragrance of a rose?
Well, I like that. And start saying yes to things with integrity, of course, that you don't normally used to say yes to. Start breaking the pattern of what you're doing every day and start saying yes. Because if you ask yourself the right question and understand transformational vocabulary, words you see and the feelings you have, words you say and the feelings you have while you're saying them, what'll begin to happen is opportunities are going to open up all over the place that have always been there. But now you're going to be able to see them differently because you're having a different approach on the energy that you're sending out.
Well, and I'll end with this final thought. I think it's really important that it's like, wow, are we talking about war and drugs and alcohol and rape? And it's like, yes, those are all extreme examples, but I'm going to punch it right back over to you, Carson, because you deal with people on the daily And some of them, they are awake. They literally understand that they're in control, that a promotion doesn't come from you. It comes by the choices they make. Ooh. We have far more in control of our life instead of waiting for someone else to anoint or bless us with something better. And so you work with both crowds, those that feel like they're in control and those that are waiting for good things to happen to them. In other words, as Tony Robbins likes to say, life is happening to you or for you. Like you see this at maybe what I would call the most mundane level, where people have a shot at more, but they don't take it because they can't see it. And how do you as a CEO wrestle through that?
People are interesting. And recognizing the power of choice, I think, is critical. I always tell people on our team, you don't get paid according to how hard you work. Like there's somebody out there right now in the world that is working on an oil rig, putting in 18-hour shifts, working their guts out. They're not paid according to how hard they work, right? Manual labor, contractors, people who build homes, pour concrete, work crazy long hours and work very, very hard. We call them blue collar because they're known for not having the highest paid jobs. So clearly, at least in America and in most capitalistic countries, you're not paid for how hard you work. You're paid for how much responsibility you're willing to take on. And when you look at your situation, when you think about the things you're suffering, it goes back to what you're saying about control, is look at it and say, what part of it am I responsible for? I remember, Kris, and this is tough, but I remember, Kris, on stage, you challenged someone who took stage and they were talking about a rape experience, and you asked them what part they played in that experience. Because usually we say, no, that happened to you. But you took them through that process for a reason, because as soon as we acknowledge that we are responsible actors in this life experience, well, now I have power. Now I can affect change on my environment. Do you remember the experience I'm talking about?
I not only remember it, but it just reminds me that Viktor Frankl ends his book and calls for a statue to be erected on the other side of the country, not just a statue of liberty, but a statue of responsibility. Because real freedom and real power comes from taking responsibility and ultimately becoming responsible for your choices. Because they love to say it takes two to tango. And for this woman, what I was really talking about was, I get it. Wrong time, wrong place, and someone did something wrong to you that was evil. But what was your part? How come you were in the wrong place at the wrong time? You didn't get there on accident, and someone didn't put you there. You put yourself there. How did you do that? How did you get in that situation? And how have you prepared your life and yourself to know how to deal with something like that? And what did you do in that moment? All of these really tough questions that no one wants to ask, but when a person is ready, those are the questions that you must investigate, because truth sets us free. And there is no freedom without truth. And there is no truth without responsibility. And there is no responsibility if you can't look for it. Your goal in life should be to take every ounce of responsibility you can for every result of your life. And if you can, that person will be truly empowered to go further than anyone else.